Let me ask about Ayn Rand.
Okay.
So it just so happens that she's entered a few conversations in this podcast, and just looking at academic philosophy or just philosophers in general, they seem to ignore Ayn Rand. Do you have a sense of why that is? Did she ever come into play, her ideas of objectivism come into play of discussions of a good life? From the perspective of existentialism in how you teach it and how you think about it. Is she somebody who you find at all interesting?
So no, I don't think she is. But it's been a long time since I've read her stuff. I read it in high school. I read The Fountainhead in high school and Atlas Shrugged. But that's at this point a very long time ago. I think I read something about objective epistemology or something too. So, my view about her could be based on a total misunderstanding of what she's up to.
Mm-hmm.
But sort of my caricature of her, and tell me if I've got it wrong, is that she's sort of motivated by a kind of, I think it's maybe sometimes you call it libertarianism, but maybe let's, in the context of our discussion, tie it back to Sartre, a kind of view according to which we're the being who has to contend with the fact that we're radically free to do stuff, and we're just not being courageous or brave enough when we don't do that. And the people to admire are the people who make stuff out of nothing. So maybe that's a bad caricature.
No. I think I think that's pretty accurate. I'm not, again, very knowledgeable about the full depth of her philosophy, but I think she takes a view of the world that's similar to Sartre in the conclusions, but makes stronger statements about epistemology. That first of all, everything is knowable. And you should always operate through reason. Like reason is very important. Like, it's like, you start with a few axioms and you build on top of that. And the axioms that everybody should operate on are the same. Again, reality is objective. It's not subjective. And so from that, you can derive the entirety of how humans should behave at the individual level and at the societal level. And there's a few conclusions. She would talk about virtue of selfishness, and sort of a lot of people use that to dismiss her. Look, she's very selfish and so on. She actually meant something very different. It's more like the Sartre thing. Take responsibility for yourself, understand what forces you're operating under, and make the best of this life. And that's how you can be the best member of society, is by making the best life you can. Like, just focus on yourself, like fix your own problems first, and then and that will make you the best member of society, of your family, of loved ones, of friends, and so on. I think the reason she's disliked, obviously on the philosophy side, she's disliked because, a little bit like Nietzsche, she's literary. I think the reason she's publicly disliked in sort of public conversations is because of how sure she is of herself. So that, which is some of the philosophers have been known to do, like make very strong statements, like hell is other people. But she was making very strong statements about basically everything. But it is the reason I bring her up is, she is an influential thinker that is not, for some reason, often brought up as such. It's not acknowledged how influential she is. I was recently looking at like a list of the most important women of the 20th century in terms of thought, not science but like thought. And she wasn't in that list. And I see this time and time again, and it doesn't make sense to me why she's so kind of dismissed, because clearly she's an author of some of the most read books ever. And she clearly had very strong ideas that should be contended with, and that's why it kind of didn't make sense to me, because she's also a creature of her time, and an important one. She's a creation of the Soviet Union, somebody who left because of that. And so some of the strength of her ideas has to do with how much she dislikes that particular philosophy and way of life. But also, she's a creature of like Sartre and like that whole like Nietzsche and so on. Now, one of the other criticisms is she doesn't integrate herself into this history. She keeps basically kind of implying that she's purely original in all her thoughts, even though she's kind of citing a lot of other people. But again, many philosophers do this kind of thing as if they are truly original, and they're not. It is interesting, and also what's interesting about her is she is a woman. She is a strong feminist, and it feels like with Simone de Beauvoir, you know, like she seems like she's a very important person in this moment of history that shouldn't be fully forgotten.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, so I mean, I don't have a lot to add. I will just say this. I mean, the way she and Beauvoir seem to me, from your description of her and remembering what I remember from 35 years ago, they seem pretty opposite from one another. Like, one of the things I find interesting about Beauvoir is that she takes seriously the thing that Sartre didn't, which is our thrownness, which is our the sense in which we're born into a situation that's already got a significance. For her, I think it was easier for her to recognize that than Sartre, because she was a woman. And Sartre seems to act as if, you know, there are no constraints, or at least there shouldn't be. We're pretty close as, you know, privileged white males.
Yeah, exactly.
If we could just get rid of the last bits of them, we would be God, like we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I think Beauvoir sort of sees things differently. I think she recognizes one's not born but becomes a woman, she says. So how does that happen? Well, you're thrown into your culture, and your culture starts treating you in a certain way because of your gender, and that starts to form your understanding and your experience of things. And by the time you're grown up, well, you're pretty well formed by that. That seems a fact. It's a fact about Sartre too, though it was harder for him to notice it because he was formed into his privilege.
But the world reminds us of our thrownness for some more than others.
Yes, absolutely. And for people who have to contend on a daily basis with the fact that the social position they're thrown into is one that negates them, or one that oppresses them, or one that sort of pushes them to the side in some way or another. I mean, the Black experience is interesting in this respect too. Frantz Fanon, who's a contemporary of Sartre and Beauvoir's, writes about it. And it's very familiar, the things that he's saying now, but, you know, he writes back in the 50s about being a Black man in Paris and getting on an elevator with a woman alone, and how, like, you know, her reaction to him, not knowing him, not having any views about, any reason to have any views about him, sort of puts him in a particular social position with respect to her. And that's if you don't have that experience, it's much harder to recognize the way in which what we're thrown into is something we might not have chosen. Mm-hmm. So the idea that's not an aspect of our existence, which, as you describe Ayn Rand's views, she sounds more like Sartre. She sounds more like either it's not an aspect of our existence, or at least we ought to sort of aim at its not being an aspect.
Almost act as if it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Act as if it's not.
And so I think, from my point of view, I don't pretend that I'm explaining the public reception of her. I'm just sort of trying to say how I understand her in this intellectual context. From my point of view, that's something big to miss, and the ambition to think that really what's happening is that we're all the same. We're all rational beings. We're all beings who, if we just got the axioms of our existence right and made good judgments and reasoned in an appropriate way, would optimize ourselves. That feels to me like a kind of natural endpoint of the philosophical tradition. I mean, sort of Plato starts off with a view that helps us in that direction, and the Enlightenment moves us further in that direction. But from my point of view, that movement has led us astray because it's missed something really important that's crucial to the kind of being that we are.
Yeah, it misses the music.
Exactly. This is the music.